A summer afternoon on the highway, an officer in dress uniform is pulled over and slammed against her patrol car. Blood trickles down her temple, yet she calmly activates Protocol Delta 7, a move no one saw coming. Within the next 17 minutes, a federal and military task force descends, forcing two rogue cops into silence. This isn't just a tale of abuse of power, it's a wake-up call for our justice system. Will you stand by and watch or cheer for justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to catch what happens next. Lieutenant Jade Sinclair felt a sharp sting as blood trickled from her temple. In an instant, she was pressed against her patrol car and cuffed like a common suspect. Calmly, she tapped a hidden sequence into her smartwatch, activating Protocol Delta 7, a specially designed military emergency response system. 17 minutes later, sleek black SUVs surrounded the scene. The very officers who had overpowered her now found themselves encircled by plainclothes agents with unmistakable authority. In that moment, what had seemed an impossible struggle against racial profiling and abuse of power became a clarion call for justice. The Department of Defense, the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and federal investigators all sprang into action, monitoring every move, every word, every breath. Lieutenant Sinclair stood steady, blood on her uniform, dignity intact. No longer alone, she watched as the system meant to protect her was itself held to account. This story is about more than one traffic stop. It's a turning point for how we safeguard service members, especially those of color, from unfair treatment. Share in the comments where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you're ready to follow Jade's courageous journey. Together, we'll witness how one woman's calm refusal to accept injustice can spark policy changes that protect the rights of every Black service member in America. On a warm summer afternoon along Interstate 26, Lieutenant Jade Sinclair guided her navy blue sedan with steady hands, the freshly pinned silver bar of her new rank at Fort Jackson catching the sunlight. After 14 years of service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and countless missions, she was fatigued yet proud, eager to reunite with her family who had traveled from Chicago to celebrate her promotion. When red and blue lights flashed behind her, she eased onto the shoulder, keeping her speed well under the limit. Perched at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, a habit drilled into her by her father, a 20-year Army veteran, she felt his warning echo in her mind. As a Black woman, you won't get the benefit of the doubt. The memory sent a chill down her spine as 2 local officers, Briggs and Baxter, approached her vehicle with visible irritation. They questioned her with clipped, suspicious tones, license and registration. Calmly, Jade complied, retrieving her military ID and vehicle registration from the glove compartment. She handed them over in a smooth, deliberate motion, maintaining her composure. She understood that arguing even to correct a mistake would only inflame the situation. Officer Briggs peered at her credentials, dismissing her military ID as not a driver's license. Undeterred, she explained her status, that she was Lieutenant Jade Sinclair, United States Army, coming from her promotion ceremony at Fort Jackson, and offered to call her commanding officer for verification. When Briggs responded with a curt order to exit the vehicle, she obeyed immediately, mindful that any hesitation could be misconstrued as resistance. In that tense moment, as asphalt heat shimmered around the patrol car, Jade stood tall in her dress uniform, medals glinting against her chest. Inside her, she braced herself, knowing that despite her spotless record and honorable service, prejudice could still dictate her fate. Little did she know her quiet resolve was about to set in motion a response that would forever change how service members of color are protected on American roads. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you believe every service member deserves equal treatment, hit like and subscribe to continue following Jade's fight for justice. Officer Briggs studied Jade's military ID with narrowed eyes. He refused to accept that a service credential could stand in for a driver's license, accusing her of impersonating a soldier. "Step out of the vehicle," he demanded, voice sharp. His partner, Officer Baxter, hovered nearby with one hand resting on his holster as if waiting for a fight. Jade remained composed. She offered once again, "You may call Colonel Harrison at Fort Jackson to verify my identity." But Briggs only sneered and barked another order. Baxter's fingers twitched over his weapon. Despite her calm demeanor, Jade sensed their growing hostility. She handed over both her military ID and her vehicle registration, both clearly marked and up to date. In the sweltering heat, the officers exchanged glances that held no respect. Their suspicion was palpable. They peered into her car, rifling through her belongings as Jade stood beside the open-door, hands at her sides. Every so often, a bead of sweat traced down her temple, mingling with the faint sheen of summer air. Briggs finally tossed the documents back onto the hood. "This isn't good enough," he muttered. Baxter shifted the hand on his holster, taking a half-step closer. Jade looked him in the eye and said softly, "I have done nothing wrong. I am a commissioned officer. My records are legitimate." Yet her words did not soften their expressions. For a moment, everything hung still. The hum of passing cars, the distant chirp of cicadas, the low rumble of Briggs's patrol vehicle. Then Briggs leaned in the brim of his cap, casting a hard shadow over her uniform. "Turn around," he ordered. "Put your hands on the car." Jade closed her eyes briefly, recalling her father's warning. "Keep your dignity, no matter what." With a measured breath, she turned and placed her palms on the warm metal. She refused to speak or flinch, even as Baxter snapped the handcuffs onto her wrists. In that tense moment, ask yourself, have you ever seen someone mistreated despite clear proof of their innocence? Comment below, and please like and subscribe to Stand with Lieutenant Sinclair, as her quiet courage ignites a call for justice. Without warning, the two officers forced Jade's hands onto the hood of her patrol car, ignoring her calm compliance. When she politely asked, "May, I know what I'm being held for?" Briggs shoved her until her temple slammed against the cold steel. Pain blossomed behind her eye. Warm blood welled and trickled down her cheek. Still, she stayed silent, only whispering, "I am not resisting," even as Baxter snapped metal cuffs around her wrists. Cars slowed. A few bystanders stepped toward the scene, mouths opening in shock at the unjust display. Beneath his breath, Briggs muttered racial slurs so casually venomous they cut deeper than any blow. The hiss of prejudice punctuated the humid air, a cruel reminder of the indignity Jade endured in full-dress uniform and combat medals. All the while, she maintained her posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Each breath was a quiet act of defiance. Though her body ached and her vision blurred at the edges, her resolve held firm. In that moment, Lieutenant Sinclair transformed from a victim of abuse into a symbol of steadfast dignity. Have you ever witnessed someone's dignity trampled despite clear proof of their innocence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe courage in the face of injustice can spark real change, please like and subscribe to follow Jade's journey and stand with those who refuse to be silenced. Unaware that Protocol Delta 7 had already been triggered, the countdown on Jade's smartwatch began in earnest. 3 minutes until initial alert, 7 minutes until military police arrived, 12 minutes for senior command notification, and 17 minutes for full tactical response. Each ticking second felt heavy, yet Jade centered herself on her father's words. "No matter what happens, always preserve your dignity." A small, resolute smile curved her lips as distant engines hummed to life. Moments later, a convoy of sleek black vehicles glided onto the highway shoulder with disciplined precision. Plainclothes agents wearing crisp dress shirts and tailored vests stepped out, their gazes cool and assessing. They moved quietly, surrounding the scene like a careful net closing in on injustice. Jade remained standing by her patrol car, hands still cuffed, but posture unbowed. Even as the agents fanned out, their presence felt less like intimidation and more like overdue accountability. One agent approached Jade and spoke her name softly, "Lieutenant Sinclair." His tone was courteous yet firm. She nodded. He produced a badge marked Department of Defense and gently unclasped her handcuffs. As the metal fell away, relief washed over her wrists like cool water. The agents began photographing and documenting everything: the hood smudges, the officers' uniforms, each discarded paperwork folder, every detail to ensure nothing could be erased or forgotten. In that charged silence, Jade took a deep breath. What had begun as a routine traffic stop had turned into a decisive moment for justice. She straightened her uniform, the bloodstain on her temple, now a badge of honor rather than shame. Around her, the protocol she helped develop unfolded flawlessly, a lifeline for service members facing the same perilous prejudice she had just endured. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment when swift action overturned an obvious wrong? Share your experience in the comments below. If you believe dignity and courage can spark real reform, please tap like and subscribe to follow Lieutenant Sinclair's journey and stand with those who refuse to let injustice go unchallenged. A black sedan bearing Pentagon plates glided silently onto the shoulder, and out stepped Special Agent Marcus Daniels, his posture calm but unmistakably authoritative. At a curt command, Officer Briggs eased his hand from his holster and raised it beside his head. Daniels produced his badge, U.S. Department of Defense Special Agent, and spoke with measured clarity. Officer Briggs, state your name, rank, and the extent of your authority here. Briggs, face rigid with surprise, stammered out the required information. Around them, the scene erupted into controlled activity. Uniformed paramedics knelt to examine Jade's temple wound, while forensic technicians photographed every angle of the patrol car's gleaming hood. Nearby, a surveillance team activated handheld recorders, ensuring no gesture or utterance was lost. 3 minutes had elapsed since Protocol Delta 7's silent countdown began. In that time, automated alerts had summoned not only military police, but also the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Satellite imagery was already downloading timestamps to confirm every movement, while escort drones hovered overhead, their cameras feeding live video to a secure command center. Daniels surveyed the gathered officers with cool detachment. All evidence indicates that Officer Briggs applied sufficient force to press Lieutenant Sinclair's head against the vehicle, causing her laceration. This constitutes excessive force and a breach of her civil and military protections. He turned to Briggs with finality. You will accompany me for a full statement and formal processing. As Briggs was guided into a waiting vehicle, Jade stood free, her uniform unruffled and her dignity intact. In that charged moment when military resolve met local resistance, a clear message rang out: no uniformed local or federal stands above accountability. By the time Colonel James Harrison arrived, the local officer's defiance had reached its peak. He stepped onto the asphalt shoulder in crisp combat blues eyes, steady as he surveyed the standoff. Even now, Officer Briggs and Baxter stood with folded arms, their chests puffed in misplaced bravado, unaware they were about to witness the full breadth of the system they'd long disparaged. Harrison's voice cut through the tension. Officer Briggs, Officer Baxter, you are both under formal detention pending civil rights processing. His simple declaration carried the weight of every uniformed agency assembled: military, police, FBI agents, Department of Justice representatives. The two officers exchanged uneasy glances as Harrison continued. You have assaulted a respected Army officer, violated her civil protections, and triggered an emergency protocol that supersedes your local jurisdiction. Handcuffs now applied by FBI liaisons clicked shut once more, this time against rebel wrists. Under the unblinking gaze of federal cameras, Briggs and Baxter were guided toward a marked FBI SUV. As they passed, DoD personnel initiated the first of many recorded interviews. Each step, each question was cataloged by legal teams from the Justice Department. Every word, every hesitation mapped against a growing dossier on policy failures and personal histories. Harrison watched as the officers were seated in conference chairs under bright lights, their badges removed and evidence tags affixed. Turning to Jade, he offered a firm nod of respect. Then he addressed the assembled law enforcement representatives. This department will undergo a comprehensive review: policies, traffic stop records, training transcripts, background investigations. Nothing is exempt. His words hung in the hot summer air like a verdict. The very system they'd relied upon would now scrutinize them from top to bottom. As Harrison signaled for medical evaluation to continue, the local officers, once emboldened by prejudice, now sat subdued, surrounded by the agencies they had underestimated. In that charged moment, the promise of Protocol Delta 7 was fulfilled. Injustice met with unyielding accountability, opening the door to systemic reform. Back at police headquarters, the Fraternal Association rushed to defend our brothers in blue, insisting that Officers Briggs and Baxter had only been doing their duty. Yet the raw data from hundreds of traffic stops told a very different story. Analysis showed that these two men had pulled over black drivers at 4 times the department average, and their arrest rate for those stops was 6 times higher. As federal investigators peeled back each layer of concealment, the scope of the bias became impossible to ignore. More than 6,000 text messages between officers revealed a torrent of racist jokes and slurs. 1,500 internal emails laid bare directives encouraging proactive enforcement in predominantly black neighborhoods. Satellite imagery and video from body cams documented unwarranted pursuits and physical confrontations. What emerged was a systematic hunting operation, a finely tuned network of officers taught to target, stop, and arrest people of color without probable cause. When the pattern of practice review finally concluded, the press ran banner headlines. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, and even moderate voices demanded immediate reforms, data-driven oversight for every traffic stop, mandatory bias training, transparent public reporting, and an independent civilian review board. The revelation that prejudice had been institutionalized for years shook the city to its core. For many, it was proof that the problem was never isolated to a few bad apples, but rooted in the very policies meant to protect and serve. When Sentinel released the hidden archive, hundreds of profiles documenting unlawful stops, false arrests, and brutality against black drivers, the city's buried shame spilled into the open. Across social media and military forums, black service members shared eerily similar ordeals, and the hashtag #ProtectOurProtectors exploded. Within days, the Department of Justice filed suit against Magnolia City, demanding a long-term federal monitor to oversee every facet of its police operations. Veterans organizations rallied in peaceful marches, their banners catching the late summer light as they marched towards City Hall. Even the State Department weighed in a formal report to the Secretary of State, urged Congress to pass a statute safeguarding all uniformed personnel during civilian law enforcement encounters. Amid this whirlwind, the wounded lieutenant, still bandaged and resting at Fort Jackson, was invited as keynote speaker at the National Civil Rights and Police Reform Conference. Though her temple scar throbbed and her uniform felt heavier than ever, she stood tall before an audience of lawmakers, activists, and fellow veterans. Her calm, unwavering voice reminded everyone why one person's courage can dismantle decades of silence and why true reform must be both immediate and enduring. 1 year later, the landscape of law enforcement in Magnolia City has been transformed. The former police chief stands indicted, and the 2 officers face federal sentences. Several senior commanders were removed, and the city appointed its first black female police chief. A permanent civilian oversight board was enshrined by city charter, ensuring independent review of every use of force incident. The Sinclair protocols, the mandatory training, uninterruptible body cams, and tracking of stop data, now serve as the statewide model and are under consideration for national adoption. Lieutenant Sinclair, promoted to major, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom and tapped to chair the new Federal Law Enforcement Accountability Commission. Her singular act of resistance, pressing that hidden command on her smartwatch, ignited systemic reform far beyond a single traffic stop. It proved that when one person refuses to be silenced, they can spark a fire that reshapes entire institutions and offers hope to all who seek justice. From this journey, we learned the power of dignity and individual courage. What seemed like a simple traffic stop on the interstate sparked an institutional transformation from countdown timers to civilian oversight boards. The clear message is that silence in the face of injustice only prolongs it, while even a lone action can ignite a broader movement. If you were in that person's shoes, you wouldn't shy away. You'd speak up, using every tool available, whether a hidden button or a speech before Congress, to protect the vulnerable. The bigger question remains, will racism truly vanish by 2050? Technology, laws, and education can advance significantly, but real change demands personal commitment to shift attitudes and behaviors. Without the resolve to uphold dignity and personal responsibility, any progress will remain temporary.